A man threw his wife and children out into the snow and vanished without a trace the next night. But what no one expected was who came to protect them. This isn't a legend. I saw it with my own eyes. When I saw the wolf standing calmly at the gate, staring at the woman and her children, my breath caught because I knew this was no accident. The forest around us had fallen into an eerie silence, as if every bird and creature held its breath too. I froze, leaning against the rough bark of an ancient pine, my old bones trembling, not from cold, but from dread. Earlier that day, the woods had seemed alive with the usual bustle, the rustle of squirrels, the distant drumming of woodpeckers. But now, even the wind was hushed, drifting through bare branches like a ghost. I'd been wandering the edge of the clearing, checking traps and looking for signs of spring under the snow, when I heard it, the sharp crack of timber and a man's furious voice booming through the frosty air. "Get out!" he yelled. "You and those brats don't belong here!" Then a woman's desperate sob. "Please, not in the cold, please!" I paused, heart thudding so hard I thought the snow underfoot would shatter. I strained to catch more, but the trees swallowed most of it. As afternoon waned, I realized the old farmhouse next door stood empty of its usual warmth. The air smelled of smoke and fear. By dusk, the sky was bruised purple, and I saw her, huddled by the doorway, thin coat buttoned against the bite of winter, clutching two small shapes to her chest. The man she'd been married to, no doubt, thrust her out into the snow, his boots crunching as he slammed the door behind them. I watched from the tree line, inches from my face a veil of frost, too rooted in place by years of caution and the memory of accidents long past. I wanted to scream at him, run forward, tackle him, anything to stop this cruelty. But I'm an old man now, and my legs betray me. I stayed hidden, heart hammering, knuckles white against the bark. I thought of my late wife, of nights I carried hot milk to our children when they cried. How could I stand by and do nothing? Snowflakes drifted down, soft as feathers, landing on the woman's hair. Her children raised their heads, tiny faces red and raw from the cold, eyes wide with confusion. One clung to her skirt, the other reached out, fingers trembling. The wolf's gaze never wavered, intense and steady. Its fur was thick, a smoky gray mottled with white, as if winter itself had woven through his coat. I swallowed. The woman pressed her cheek against the older child's head, whispering something I couldn't hear. Maybe promises, prayers, or apologies. The wolf took a cautious step closer, so close that I saw its breath puffing like steam. In that moment, time slowed. Snow hung in midair. The world held its breath. My pulse raced, and I felt sick, as if I'd swallowed ice. What would happen next? Would the wolf attack? Would it turn and snap at the woman's neck, or would it... No, that was impossible. With a quiet click of claws on wood, the wolf nudged a fresh carcass of a rabbit toward them. My throat tightened. It was half buried in snow, but still whole. The woman gasped. The younger child let out a small cry, and the wolf's ears flattened, calm but alert, as if it recognized that cry as a call for help. I wanted to step forward, make my presence known, protect them, but my joints screamed at me. I pressed a hand to my chest. My heart was a runaway horse. I thought of turning back, leaving, running for help. But who would come? The nearest neighbor was miles away, and by the time anyone arrived, they'd be frozen solid. The wolf's head dipped low. It gave another gentle push. The woman, tears in her eyes, scooped up the rabbit and held it to her children. I heard her whisper, "Thank you," though her voice cracked like dry ice. The wolf stood, body taut, eyes never leaving hers. For a moment, they were equals, hunter and hunted, human and beast, bound by the fragile thread of compassion. Then the man's voice barked from the open window, "Get back inside or I'll deal with you!" Fear flickered in the woman's face. She glanced back at the house, dread pooling in her eyes. The wolf growled low, a rumble like distant thunder, and the man recoiled. He cursed, slammed the window shut, and the clearing fell silent again. Darkness was settling like a blanket, and the wolf, having done what it came to do, turned and vanished into the trees. I watched its shape melt into shadows, felt a pang of loss sharper than any bullet wound. The woman gathered her children and stumbled toward the barn shelter, clutching the gift of the rabbit. I followed at a distance, too afraid to reveal myself, but unable to leave them entirely to fate. Later, I stood by the old fence and peered across the field, expecting to see nothing but moonlit drifts. Instead, I saw the wolf again, perched on a fallen log, watching me. Our eyes met. My breath froze. In those deep amber eyes, I sensed a judgment, not of me, but of the world's cruelty, and maybe forgiveness too. I shook my head as if to clear a dream. I turned away, trudged home through the snow, every step echoing in my ears. I lay in bed that night, staring at the cracks in my ceiling, trying to believe what I had seen. I thought I'd lived long enough to see it all. I was wrong. I thought that was the end. When dawn broke, I was the first to see them. Deep, precise paw prints pressed into the new snow, leading straight to the little gate of the shed. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it echo in my ears. Pressing my face to the frosted pane, I stared at those tracks, too large and too elegant for a fox or marten, too deliberate for a stray dog. Only a day had passed since I'd witnessed that brutal expulsion of the mother and her 2 children into the biting cold, and already the forest whispered its own kind of justice. I slipped out of my own cabin, careful not to disturb the snoring old hound asleep by the hearth, and crept toward the woman's shed. Inside, she knelt by the small brick stove, coaxing embers to life with a broom of birch twigs. The warm, tangy scent of burning wood curled toward the low rafters, and in a corner, a loaf of dark rye bread lay cooling on a rough plank. The children huddled close, their small shoulders shaking with silent sobs, not from cold now, but from relief. I hesitated, buried in the hush of snowfall, torn between stepping forward and remaining unseen. Every part of me ached to help. My joints sang with the memory of lifting my own children, feeding them warm porridge long ago. But I was an old man, and my bones reminded me of past injuries. I stayed hidden, watching as the mother broke the bread into 3 pieces, pressing each child's share gently into their hands. When she looked up, her eyes met mine through the cracked glass, and I saw tears glinting on her lashes. I turned away, ashamed. Perhaps it was enough that I bore witness. Perhaps the forest itself would be their guardian. The next morning, I woke to the crunch of my own boots as I stepped outside. The world was a brilliant tapestry of ice and silver. Every twig shone like a crystal wand, but what caught my breath was waiting by the shed door. The pristine carcass of a hare, fur still glistening with frost, its small, delicate paws curled as if in sleep. A bead of frozen blood had settled on the snow, catching the pale light like a ruby. I crouched, reluctant to touch such a gift. My mind raced. Why would a wild creature bring its prey to humans rather than devour it itself? I felt a tremor of something I couldn't name. Fear? Reverence? I thought it a one-off, a message perhaps from the forest gods. I pictured the wolf in the deep woods, slipping through shadows with a burden in its jaws, driven by some instinct beyond hunger. I returned home to nurse that wonder, but sleep eluded me as my thoughts circled like caged birds. Morning number 3 arrived in the same spectral hush. I braced myself and made my way back to the shed. There, laid upon the threshold, was a small quail, so slight it looked as though the wind itself had deposited it there. Its feathers, ruffled by frost, hinted at its final flutter. The woman shivered in the doorway, gathering the gift as if it might vanish. Her children clutched at its warmth. In that moment, I knew this was no accident. For 3 consecutive nights, someone or something had hunted for them, carried food through the darkness, and laid it at their feet. I stood at the window, not believing my eyes. A wolf, feeding people, a beast, a predator, but he was a savior. The words battered through my mind like relentless hail. I stumbled back from the glass, heart racing, breath shallow. I pressed trembling fingers to my temples, as if I could steady the whirlwind in my head. How to explain this? A creature born to kill for its own survival, yet risking its life to sustain others? The forest had always seemed indifferent, even cruel. I'd trapped beavers and hunted deer, understood nature's impartial laws. Yet here was a defiance of those laws, a miracle carved in snow. I thought that was the end. I imagined nature would soon reclaim its spoils. The wolf, satisfied with a few gifts, would vanish back into the pines. The woman and her children would scavenge enough to survive until spring. But as night fell again, I sensed the forest bracing itself, preparing something else entirely. I slipped into my coat, grabbed a lantern, and followed the fresh prints into the darkness, determined to witness what the next dawn might bring. I waited until the moon had climbed high, a pale sentinel in the ink-black sky, before I crept from my cabin. My lantern's glow trembled against the snowy ground, but I dared not light it. The forest heard every snap of ice-crusted twig. I tucked myself into a hollow beside a fallen spruce, its needles cushioning the bite of the snow. Each breath felt like inhaling shards of glass, but I forced calm. Tonight I would discover who had been delivering food beneath the stars. Hours passed in a hush, so complete I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. My legs ached, and my body begged me to flee back to the warmth of my stove, but I pressed on. Then, a faint rustle, soft, deliberate, echoed through the stillness. My lantern, tucked at my side, flickered as I raised my head. Out of the darkness, slender shapes slid across the snow, a pack of wolves moving with the precision of dancers in a silent ballet. My breath froze. They emerged into a moonlit clearing, but one figure broke from the group, stepping forward as if on a stage. He was massive, shoulders broad, coat a tapestry of grays and charcoal, yet it was his face that claimed my gaze. A long, pale scar ran from his right brow down to his jaw. His left eye was the soft amber of aged maple, his right, the icy blue of glacial water. He looked regal, like an ambassador between the wild and the world of men. Behind him, 5 others lingered in the shadows, heads bowed, waiting. None dared challenge the leader's silent authority. The wounded in me recognized something in his stance. A protector, a judge, a guardian of the weak. I held my breath as the leader padded forward, snow crunching under his great paws. He carried in his jaws the same hair I had seen by the shed 2 nights ago, its sleek body still warm. The other wolves fell in behind him as he approached the wooden door of that humble shelter. There he lowered the carcass delicately to the ground, teeth releasing their prize as if presenting an offering. For one impossible moment, he stood motionless, head raised, nostrils flaring in the chilly air. Then he looked not at his pack, but at the house itself, at the thin glow of the stove's chimney smoke, curling into the sky. It was a stare so human that I felt my knees tremble. It was the look of someone who carries a burden too heavy to ignore, of someone compelled to act by a force beyond instinct. Compassion. He lingered a heartbeat longer, as if ensuring the gift would be received, then turned and melted back into the forest, with his pack trailing silently behind him. I remained frozen where I sat, the echo of my own pulse thundering in my ears. My lantern lay forgotten, my joints numb from the cold. I dared not believe what I'd witnessed. As dawn's gray fingers tugged at the horizon, I rose, muscles stiff, and made my way back. Carrying the memory of that scarred face and mismatched eyes like talismans in my mind, I forced my legs to move. Back at my cabin, I paused at the window and peered toward the shed. The fresh carcass lay untouched, a testament to last night's miracle. I pressed my palm to the glass. "It's just chance," I muttered to myself, voice wavering. A wild beast, driven by hunger or curiosity, happened to leave a meal. I shook my head as though dispelling a dream. Surely, this was nothing more than a random intersection of wolf and human need. I poured myself a strong cup of black tea, its steam swirling in the cold air, and settled into my chair. I stared at the walls, the shadows twisting like smoke, and convinced myself it was merely luck, nothing more, a predator turning protector once in a million hunts. The forest remained inscrutable, and I, its humble witness, decided to chalk it up to fate's whim. But deep inside, as I sipped my tea, my heart refused to settle. That scarred ambassador of the wild had spoken without sound, and I could not shake the feeling that this encounter was more than coincidence, that the wolf and I had met on the edge of something greater than chance. The moon was still high when I heard the first stumbling steps approaching the shed. I'd been dozing by the stove, half awake, lulled by the crackle of embers. Then came a harsh, slurred shout. "Open up! I know you're in there." The voice belonged to the neighbor, the same man who'd thrown that desperate family out into the snow. Now he was drunk, angry, and wielding his anger like a weapon in the still night. I peered through the frost-blurred window just in time to see him slam his fist against the wooden door. The sound rang like a gunshot in the silent forest. His boots scraped the snow, sending up powder that sparkled in the lantern's glow. He ranted, his words indistinct, but venom dripped from every syllable. "Come out, you cowards. Thought you could hide from me." He kicked the door once, twice, then leaned close, spittle flecking the wood. Heart pounding, I expected the woman inside to plead for mercy, or worse, scream herself hoarse. But before she could move, something else slipped from the edge of the tree line. I caught a glimpse of silver fur, a sleek curve of muscle, and then absolute stillness. The wolf emerged as silently as smoke, stepping into the small pool of lantern light. His eyes were fixed on the man, calm but unflinching. The neighbor stumbled backward, eyes wild. "What the?" he stammered. The lantern clattered to the ground with a dull thud, its light dancing across the wolf's broad shoulders. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with winter. Here was death incarnate, yet it moved with a purpose I could not fathom. The man screamed, a raw, animal sound, and turned to flee, but the wolf was faster. In one powerful lunge, the beast closed the distance. I braced for the worst, a vicious maul, blood staining the snow. Instead, the wolf stopped just short of the man's outstretched arm. He bared teeth in a warning snarl, low and resonant, a sound that rattled the trees themselves. Then, just as startling, he reared back on his haunches and snapped the man's coat clean off the straps, dragging it back a foot before releasing it to the snow. The neighbor tripped, sprawling into the drift, his curses swallowed by the wind. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass. This was no hunting strike. It was a clear command to leave. The woman inside must have unlocked the door by then, for I saw her step out, arms protectively around her children. The wolf lowered his head to her level, meeting her gaze with an intensity that made my chest ache. He did not growl. He did not snap. He simply stood guard, a silent sentinel. The neighbor scrambled to his feet, scrambling away as though the snow itself were alive and clawing at him. He didn't pause until he'd reached the edge of the clearing. As he turned back for one last look, the moonlight glinted in his terrified eyes. Then he vanished into the woods, boots crunching faster than any runner's. I waited until his footsteps faded completely, until only the hush of falling snow remained, before I allowed myself to exhale. Inside the shed, the woman's knees trembled. She swallowed hard, brushing a strand of hair from her child's cheek. The wolf gave a soft exhalation, a breath like a blessing, then melted back into the dark tree line, disappearing without a sound. I stumbled outside, snow crunching under my boots, and stood where the wolf had stood moments before. Empty air. The world felt raw, as if it had shed a layer of itself. I found the neighbor's discarded coat, cuffed in the snow, the fabric shredded but intact. I pressed my hand to the tears in the cloth and felt an odd surge of gratitude mixed with dread. Gratitude that the wolf had protected the innocent. Dread for the power that moved through that creature, an intelligence and a heart vast as the forest itself. The next morning, the village buzzed with rumors. The neighbor was gone, perhaps run off, perhaps lost forever in the woods. No one had seen him since that night. The woman and her children were safe, sheltered by neighbors who did not know how close they'd come to tragedy. And somewhere out there, a wolf roamed the pines, bearing scars I could not see and wisdom beyond any human's. If I had known then that this was only the beginning, I might have tried to follow him deeper into the forest. But my bones reminded me of my age, and my heart trembled at the thought of chasing such a guardian. All I could do was stand in the footprints of snow he left behind and wonder what would come next. The next morning, the village was alive with whispers. At the well, women leaned in close, exchanging theories in hushed tones. "He must have wandered off and died," one said, clutching her shawl. "Or been eaten by wolves," another replied, shuddering. The butcher swore he saw a dark shape slip between the trees, but no one dared venture into the woods to look. By midday, a battered police SUV rolled up the narrow lane, its lights flashing absurdly against the white landscape. Two officers stepped out, faces pale from the cold. They knocked on doors, took statements, scribbled in notebooks. "Did you see this man last night? Heard anything unusual?" they asked. No one had. No one saw him leave. No one heard a struggle. They found only his coat, torn but bloodless, draped over a fallen branch at the forest's edge. The officers photographed the scene, dusted for prints, but in the end, they packed their gear and drove away, saying, "Without a body or witnesses, there's nothing more we can do." The village returned to its routines, though no one spoke his name again. I alone held the truth, and I carried its weight like a stone in my chest. I couldn't tell them what I'd seen, that a wolf had faced him down, that I'd watched a beast of fang and fur drive a man away without harm, that the forest itself had delivered justice. If the authorities learned of such defiance, they would hunt the wolf mercilessly. I imagined hunters descending with rifles, packs of dogs, blood in their eyes. I couldn't bear that, so I lied. I told the officers I didn't know anything, that I was too old to follow tracks. Each lie cracked my heart a little more. Meanwhile, the mother and her children resumed their cautious life in the shed. Every evening, I saw her pause at the door, glance into the tree line as if expecting a miracle. One night, she stood with arms raised to the stars. "Thank you," she whispered into the quiet, voice trembling with both fear and hope. "Thank you, whoever you are, up there." Her children pressed against her legs, eyes shining with wonder. I watched from a distance, my breath a plume in the moonlight, and felt my own tears freeze on my cheeks. The wolf continued to visit, but the offerings stopped. No more hares, no quails, no dinner parcels at dawn. Instead, I saw him slip from the shadows and stand beside their door, silent as a stone statue. He watched over them, head held high, breathing steam into the night. He never approached the hearth, never hovered with a gift. He simply remained, a sentinel on four legs, guardianship pure and unwavering. I once believed that nature's laws were absolute: hunt or be hunted, kill or be killed. But this wolf defied every rule I knew. He embodied something I could not name, an intelligence fused with compassion, a strength tempered by restraint. In his presence, fear dissolved and awe took its place. I found myself telling the children stories of him, painting his image in their young minds. Scarred leader, mismatched eyes, heart larger than the wilderness itself. When I shared these tales with the woman, she pressed my hand and nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "He is not a beast," she said softly, voice firm. "He is someone other, stronger than fear, wiser than people." I kept those words with me like a sacred vow. Every dawn, I checked the gate for fresh prints. Every dusk, I scanned the tree line for his silhouette, and each time I saw him standing there, still, unwavering, I understood that the world held mysteries far deeper than any man's laws. I didn't know what would happen next. The police wouldn't return. The villagers would forget the missing man and carry on. But I knew the wolf would remain, a silent guardian in the white expanse, and I, an old witness with a secret, would never stop believing that in the heart of winter, amid cruelty and despair, a wild soul had risen to protect the powerless, and in doing so had taught me that compassion is the true law of the wild. Spring arrived on silent pause. The snow melted in patches, revealing the pale green of new grass and the first brave flowers pushing through damp earth. I stood at the edge of the clearing, breathing in the warm, honeyed scent of thaw, and watched the shed's door hang open like a promise. The woman was packing her small cart for the long journey to the city. Baskets of jars, blankets, the few meager belongings they'd managed to keep through the winter. Her children darted between her legs, tugging at her coat sleeves, chattering with nervous excitement about the warm streets and crowded markets ahead. I felt a pang in my chest, as if my ribs had been gently squeezed. After all those nights, hare carcasses at dawn, quails tucked beneath the doorframe, the wolf standing sentinel through the blackest hours, I realized I'd grown accustomed to their presence. I'd begun to count on them, and now, as the rhythm of their deliveries slowed to nothing, I wondered if I'd been foolish to hope that such miracles could last. The cart's wooden wheels groaned as the woman hoisted herself up beside her elder child. She looked back then, her eyes searching mine from across the muddy yard. My heart thundered so loudly I could scarcely think. Was it a farewell? A plea? Gratitude? I lifted my hand in a trembling wave, but she didn't return it. Perhaps she thought it unsafe to linger. Perhaps she believed that whatever force had protected her through the darkest nights would continue unseen. I watched them trundle down the path toward the main road, the children's laughter growing distant, mingling with the cheerful twitter of spring birds. I told myself that this was it. This was the end. I pictured dawn bringing nothing but silence. The forest would resume its natural order. Wolves would hunt rabbits and deer, and I would return to my traps and my quiet loneliness. But the night had one more secret left for me. I settled by the same fallen log where I had hidden on countless nights, fog of breath curling in the chill air. The wind carried the scent of melting snow and damp pine needles. I draped my coat tighter around my shoulders, yet I could feel the anticipation thrumming through my veins. I glanced up at the moon, slender and silver, rising over the treetops. Its pale light pooled on the ground like liquid metal. I waited, listening. Then I heard it, a soft, deliberate padding through broken branches. My old bones tensed, and I gripped my lantern, though I dared not light it. The steps paused just beyond its glow, and then he emerged, alone. He was larger now in the clearing, his fur matted with melting frost, droplets clinging to the coarse hairs like fallen stars. The silver scar across his muzzle stood out stark against the dark arc of his coat. He moved without sound, every muscle controlled, limbs gliding over the damp earth. My breath caught in my throat. I should have felt fear, but instead I was overwhelmed by a rush of something warmer, relief. He stopped only a few paces from me, closer than ever before. The lantern's faint gleam illuminated the amber of his good eye and the frozen blue of his other one. He tilted his head, nostrils flaring, as if drinking in the scent of spring and the ghosts of those he had protected. A single drop of water fell from the tip of his ear, and I felt it echo like a bell in my chest. I opened my mouth to speak, to whisper a thank you or a prayer, but no words came. The world narrowed to the space between us. His gaze was steady, searching. I sensed the weight of all those nights, all those gifts laid at the doorstep of the shed, not born of malice, but of a will to protect. My legs trembled, and I sank to one knee in the softening snow. I felt every stitch in my threadbare coat, every ache in my joints, as though my body remembered each winter's hardship. Yet in that moment, none of it mattered. There was only him and me, suspended in a fragile truce between human frailty and the vast, mysterious kindness of the wild. He took a tentative step forward, closer still, until I could see each individual hair around his muzzle. Then, as if satisfied that I had understood, he held his ground, meeting my eyes with an intensity that stole the very air from my lungs. I felt a tear slip down my cheek, warm against the frozen world. A single tear carrying the weight of wonder, fear, gratitude, and awe. For a heartbeat, we remained like that, man and wolf, bound by an unspoken covenant. Then, with deliberate slowness, he turned. I watched the curve of his haunches, the rhythm of his tail, the way his paws fell silent on the earth. He paused at the edge of the lantern's glow, glanced back once more, and melted into the shadows beyond. I lay there long after he was gone, staring at the empty clearing. My heart pounded with questions, with longing, with the echo of his gaze. I realized I would carry that moment for the rest of my days. In his eyes, there was no malice, no fear. There was wisdom, as if he was saying, "You understand now, don't you? Now you understand." The neighbor's cabin stood empty beneath the pale morning sky, its door swinging on rusty hinges as if inviting the wind to take what remained. I approached slowly, boots crunching on the thawing ground, and peered through the dusty window. Sunlight slanted into the dark room, illuminating overturned chairs, a single boot lying on its side, and nothing more. No sign of life, no tracks in the mud. The family was gone. Their cart had carried them away to the distant city, leaving behind only echoes. I shivered, remembering how those same walls had once echoed with the neighbor's drunken rage, the man who'd thrown them into the snow. Now his house was abandoned, as empty as the promise of his threats. A strange hush settled over the clearing, broken only by the drip of melting icicles. I wondered where he had gone, or if he had gone at all. I turned back toward my own cabin, eyes drawn once again to the well-worn path of prints leading away from the shed. Something tugged at me, an old curiosity mingled with dread. I crouched by the edge of the path, tracing a single paw mark with my gloved finger. The depth of the print told me more. A heavy weight, deliberate movements, paws sliding over thawing snow. But what struck me most was the direction. These weren't tracks coming from the depths of the woods. They were tracks going into the woods. All winter long, I'd imagined a wolf slipping from the pines to deliver food and deliver justice, guided by some secret loyalty to the suffering family. I'd believed the forest had reached out to them, that the wild had responded to human cruelty with compassion. But here, in the soft mud of spring, I saw it clearly. The wolf wasn't wandering at random. He knew where he was going, every single night. He came not by chance, but by choice. My breath caught as I followed the trail a few paces into the trees. The prints led to a hollow under a fallen oak, its roots exposed like gnarled fingers clutching the earth. There, buried half in moss and needles, lay a piece of torn cloth, faded and frayed at the edges. I recognized the pattern, the same plaid shirt the neighbor had worn that night. My heart lurched. The wolf must have torn it from him, carried it off into the forest like a trophy or a warning. I crouched and touched the cloth, its fibers still warm from human skin. I stood in the hush of the hollow and felt the weight of it all settle onto my shoulders. The wolf had not only protected the innocent, he had judged the guilty. He had taken from the man the very coat that had threatened women and children, yet he had not killed him. He had enacted a justice neither cruel nor vengeful, but measured, rightful. The more I thought about it, the more I understood. This was retribution, woven with mercy. I rose and retraced my steps to the cabin. Inside, the fire was still glowing in the hearth, embers smoldering in the ash. I washed my hands at the basin, but the cold water could not wash away the tremor in my heart. I sank onto a low wooden stool, wrapped my arms around myself, and stared at the fire as if expecting the wolf's eyes to appear in the dancing flames. My mind replayed every encounter: the first carcass of hare, the quail left at dawn, the sentinel in the night, the bleeding footprints in the soft mud. Each memory felt like a pulse under my skin, reminding me that what I'd witnessed was no random kindness, but a deliberate act of balance. Nature's own court, presided over by a creature of fang and fur. I thought I understood the laws of the wild: kill or be killed, predator or prey. But this wolf, this judge of the forest, had shown me a law far greater, that compassion and justice can walk hand in paw. He balanced the scales without tipping them too far, without cruelty. In those moments he had been more human than any man I'd known. A log fell in the hearth and I started, as if I'd been jolted awake from a dream. I realized I'd been sitting in silence for hours, enveloped in my own astonishment. My old joints protested as I stood, and I crossed to the window. Outside, the forest shimmered with new life, budding leaves, fresh moss, the promise of summer. But beneath that renewal lay the memory of winter's harshness and of one wolf's unwavering will. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass and whispered to the empty woods, "I cannot forget you." A faint breeze stirred the pines in answer, and I smiled through tears. I sat by the stove long into the night, turning the wolf story over in my mind. I tried to understand how a beast could be kinder than a human, how a creature driven by instinct could choose mercy over malice. And though I searched for answers, I found only wonder. I sat by the stove and could not understand. How could a beast be kinder than a human? A year had slipped by like drifting snow. One morning, a thin envelope arrived, sealed with faded wax. My hand trembled as I broke it open. Inside, a letter from the woman. They had settled in the city. The children were healthy and growing fast, and she thanked me for keeping watch over them. I read her words by the dying embers of my hearth, each sentence warming a part of me I thought had long frozen. That afternoon, I strapped on my boots and walked toward the place where I'd seen the wolf for the first time. The trail had changed, winter's dead hush replaced by spring's lush chorus. But I recognized the bend in the creek, the fallen pine that lay across the path, the mossy hollow beneath its roots. My heart thudded, half in hope, half in dread. What if the wolf had moved on, following the river's whisper toward some other need? What if he was gone, and the magic of those nights was lost forever? I followed the old animal tracks, now softened by rain and new growth. They led not away but deeper into the trees, winding like a ribbon of memory through ferns and young birches. My pulse quickened. Something in the forest shifted. A hush, then a trembling vibration under my feet, as though the earth itself was listening. I paused in that sacred stillness, closed my eyes, and felt the old fear and wonder tangle in my chest. Then I heard it, a single, soaring howl that cut through the canopy and stung the air like a blade. Lonely, piercing, it rose and fell again, carrying centuries of forest secrets on its breath. When I heard that voice, my heart clenched. He was saying goodbye, or calling, or thanking. In that moment, the world snapped into sharp relief. I imagined him standing on a ridge, silhouette against the moon, scanning the horizon for the family he'd protected. I pictured the scar along his muzzle glistening like a silver seam. I saw his mismatched eyes, one warm amber, one cold blue, reflecting the deep truth that had guided him all winter, that compassion could bridge the gap between beast and man. If your heart is racing, subscribe to the channel. Here we tell the truth. Nature is wiser than we think. The howl faded into the rustle of leaves. A lone raven fluttered overhead, as though carrying news between worlds. My legs felt weak, and tears pricked at my eyes. I pressed a hand to my chest, as if holding the wolf's farewell inside me. Silence settled again, but I did not move. I let the forest envelop me, breathed in its ancient breath, felt the echo of those nights pulse in my veins. As the sky lightened toward dusk, I turned and walked back along the moss-covered path, clutching the memory of that voice like a lit torch. My tears left tracks in the mud, and I did not wipe them away. They were my own kind of footprints, proof that I had been here, that I had witnessed the impossible. I reached my cabin and sank onto the old wooden chair by the hearth. The fire had dwindled to glowing coals. I let the smoke curl around me, and my gaze drifted to the trees, visible through the frozen glass. I could almost see him there, watching, waiting for me to believe. If someone had told me this, I wouldn't have believed, but I saw it with my own eyes. And now, every night, when the wind sighs through the pines, I listen for his song. I close my eyes and remember that even in the harshest winter, a single act of mercy can outshine all cruelty. I whisper into the dark, "Thank you," wherever you roam, and I know, in the hush that follows, that he has heard me. If you have also encountered a miracle in the wild, write, "Animals remember kindness."
When I saw the wolf in the scope, my heart froze, because I knew she was looking straight at me. I'd been stalking through the pines of northern Idaho alone for 3 sun-bleached days, chasing the old thrill of the hunt. By late afternoon on that 4th day, my boots had turned the snow to a gritty paste, and my stomach was growling louder than any forest creature. I should have been setting up camp, but something nudged me to push on. The clearing lay ahead like a secret waiting to be unmasked. Shadows draped the snow, and every breath felt sharp in my lungs. Then I saw her, a full-grown she-wolf, her coat a tapestry of grays, whites, and black streaks that shimmered in the slanting light. She stood motionless at the far edge, ears pricked, muscles coiled beneath her fur. Beauty froze me in place. I raised my rifle, careful not to let the metal barrel betray my presence with a glint. Heart hammering, I aligned the crosshairs just below her shoulder. Every hunter knows the ritual: steady breath, gentle squeeze. In that moment, I almost whispered an apology. But then I squeezed. The crack of the shot exploded through the clearing. The wolf howled, first a long, keening wail that split the air, then a softer, desperate whine as she staggered. Snow sprayed around her paws, droplets like a frozen rain. I watched, breath stuck in my chest, as she disappeared into the trees, leaving only a smear of blood on the ivory ground. Silence rushed in to fill the space the wolf had left. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. My hands shook so badly I could barely rack the bolt. My hunter's pride warred with a sickening twist in my gut. I dropped the rifle and stumbled forward through the snow, following the faint trail of red drops. My boots left deep imprints, her tracks, elegant and sure, led away. After a few minutes, the trail vanished beneath an overhang of fir boughs. No sign of her. Only the echo of that howl, haunting me and weaving through my thoughts. What have I done? Darkness fell fast in those woods. I shook my head, trying to banish the guilt. I did what I came to do, I muttered, though the words tasted bitter. I collected my rifle and started setting up camp on an open ridge where the trees gave way to the fading sky. My fingers, stiff with cold and adrenaline, fumbled with the tent stakes. I mumbled to myself, * game taken. Nothing left to worry about, *. I crouched inside the small tent, unpacking a can of soup. Steam curled up, but I could hardly taste it. Outside, the forest whispered in restless sighs. I told myself I'd sleep off the edge of the guilt by morning. By midnight, I lay on my sleeping pad, the zippered flap of the tent barely closed against the starless sky. My eyes refused to stay shut. All I could hear was that long, mournful howl, and the memory of those glinting amber eyes. I pressed my hand over my chest, trying to will my heart back into a normal rhythm. I thought that was it, I whispered to the dark. I thought, after the shot, it would just be over. I shifted on the pad, sweat cooling on my skin. My mind raced, * she's out there, wounded, dying alone. I did this, *. Still, sleep came eventually, fitful and shallow. In my dreams, I heard paws crunching in the snow, felt the wolf's gaze burning into me. I woke with a start when the tent fabric shuddered, as if something heavy brushed against it. My head snapped toward the wall, pulse pounding. But outside, nothing but wind and moonless blackness. I closed my eyes again, unwilling to face another night of half-light and echoing howls. Tomorrow, I promised myself, I'll go find her, finish what I started. I drifted off, convincing myself the hunt was done, the story told. I thought I'd done my duty and could sleep in peace. I thought, on that ridge in the silent, frosted forest, that was the end. But I was wrong. Episode 2, Steps Around the Tent. I jolted awake sometime after midnight, my body rigid as if struck by unseen ice. My head throbbed, and each breath felt loud in the tight cocoon of the tent. Outside, the forest was a living thing, whispering, creaking, shifting. My heart pounded against my ribs so hard I was sure I'd wake the world. A faint crunch of snow caught my ear. Then another. Soft, careful, like someone tiptoeing around the perimeter. My pulse spiked, every hunter's fear of a sudden charge raced through me. It's coming back for me, I thought, panic coiling in my gut. I fumbled for my headlamp, snapping it on. The beam trembled in my hand as I peered through the thin nylon wall. Snow drifted by outside under a dark sky, but no shape emerged. Crunch. Crunch. Whispers of movement circled the tent. I felt the ground shake under invisible footsteps, first to my left, then behind, then in front again. My breath hitched. This wasn't the rush of an attack. It was, cautious. Purposeful. As if someone, or something, was walking the edge of my little fortress. I swallowed hard, yanking aside the flap and swinging the lamp out. Gasping, I scanned the clearing. Moonlight, or its absence, made everything gray and shapeless. Trees stood like silent sentinels. Snow lay undisturbed except for my own footprints. I stepped out, rifle raised, boots crunching loud. The cold air stung my lungs. I called out in a low voice, trying to sound fearless, "Hello? Who's there?" Only my echo answered, fading into the pines. I advanced in a tight circle, eyes straining for movement. I thought I saw a shadow slip behind a trunk, then nothing. My throat went dry. Then it came, a single, drawn-out howl. Not the fierce, pack-defining scream of a wolf challenging an intruder, but a sorrowful, longing song that seemed to bend the air around it. One voice, stretched thin over the dark. My legs trembled. Part of me wanted to load the rifle and fire into the night. Part of me wanted to drop to my knees and beg forgiveness. Fear and shame churned together so violently I thought I might collapse. What have I done? I closed my eyes against the light and whimpered, remembering the shot that felled her. The bullet ripping through her side. The way she had looked at me, not with hatred but something deeper, betrayal, maybe, or sheer disbelief. I took a shaky step backward, leaning on the tent's frame. My breath came in ragged gasps. The snow around me was pristine, untouched, except for the faint circles made by those tentative footsteps. My shame weighed heavier than my fear. I pictured her there, wounded, calling across the trees, calling me. And I had left her to die alone. The wind sighed, carrying that soft, mournful howl once more. It sunk into my bones. I bit my lip to keep from crying out. Fear ran cold in my veins. Every story I'd ever heard about wolves returning to finish the job flashed behind my eyelids. Yet this wasn't the growl of vengeance. It was something else entirely, a song of grief. I blinked up at the inky sky. I tried to steady my voice. "I'm sorry," I said to the darkness. Silence answered. Then another footstep, closer this time, as if drawn nearer by my confession. My heart slammed against my ribs again. I wondered if I should run, dive back into the tent and slam the door, pretend I never saw a thing. But I didn't move. The night stretched, and the only sound was my own breathing and the soft pad of paws on snow. I held my rifle loosely, useless now. Minutes crawled by. Eventually the steps receded, circling away until they vanished into the black. The breeze carried off the last echoes of that lonely howl. I stood rigid in the clearing, chest heaving. Every instinct screamed to track her down, to end her suffering or prove she was truly gone. But my legs refused to obey. My mind raced, maybe it was just her mate, searching. I shuddered, shaking my head. I'd watched her fall. Only one wolf had been there through it all. But I told myself what I needed to hear, maybe a male was following her trail, drawn by the blood scent, looking for her. That made sense. I closed the tent flap with trembling hands and crawled inside, pressing my back to the wall. My limbs felt numb, but my mind burned bright with guilt and fear. As I lay back down, I whispered into the dark, probably just her mate looking for her. "He won't hurt me." I tried to will sleep back into me, but the forest had changed, no longer a silent backdrop, but a witness. And somewhere out there, something mournful walked in circles, listening. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought I'd wake in the morning to clear skies and wiped snow. I thought that was the whole story. But I was wrong. Episode 3, A Meeting of Eyes. Dawn broke in a haze of muted gray, the sky a watercolor smudge above the pines. I crawled from my tent, each breath a plume of regret, and stepped into the morning chill. My legs felt leaden, as if the weight of the night's guilt had settled in my boots. Snow crunched underfoot as I circled the site where I'd lain. Pale light filtered through the mist, painting the world in ghostly tones. Around my tent, the snow was disturbed, but not by my own movements. It formed a perfect circle, the footprints too small to be human, too delicate to belong to a deer. Someone, or something, had walked all the way around, studying me. I swallowed hard and followed the prints into the thinning fog. My heart pounded so loud I was sure the world could hear it. Every step brought fresh doubts, what am I doing? Why am I here, yet curiosity and fear propelled me forward. Then, through the mist and between two firs, I saw it, a small shape, standing stock still. My breath caught in my throat. At first I thought it was a stump or a felled tree, half hidden in the haze. But then it moved. A wolf pup, no larger than a medium-sized dog, its fur puffy and matted with frost. It stared at me with luminous yellow eyes that cut through the gloom. For a heartbeat, I felt rooted to the spot. He wasn't trembling or cowering, he stood with a calm that defied his size. And when our gazes locked, I felt it like a blow to the chest. He looked at me as if I were one of his own. I could not move. My rifle hung useless on my shoulder. My mouth went dry. I wanted to speak, to tell him I was sorry, to plead for forgiveness, but no words came. Instead, I watched as his head tilted slightly, as though trying to understand me. My fear and shame warred inside me. My hands twitched, half reaching for the rifle, half lifting in supplication. Every instinct screamed for me to run far from this tiny creature who embodied everything I had destroyed. But he did nothing. He merely stood there, still and unwavering, as if guarding some unspoken truth. I took an involuntary step forward. My boots pierced the crusted snow, sending up a small spray of white. The pup's ears flattened just a fraction, a flicker of caution. Yet he remained. Time slowed until I could hear my own heartbeat thudding in my ears, loud enough to startle even the quiet morning. The mist curled around us, blurring the lines between hunter and hunted, between predator and protector. I remembered the howl from last night, how it had resonated with grief rather than rage. Now, faced with this young life, I understood. She had not come to finish the hunt. She had come to pass something on. A hot sting grew behind my eyes. I swallowed hard against the lump in my throat. The pup's gaze did not waver. Instead, he took a tentative step forward, his body a promise rather than a threat. I froze again, feeling the weight of that gesture. In that moment, I realized he represented more than a simple creature of the wild. He was a burden of my own making, a living testament to what I had done. Before I could speak, he turned and padded away, melting into the fog as silently as he had appeared. I stayed frozen, watching until he vanished entirely, leaving only the ghost of his presence in the cold morning air. My knees gave out, and I sank onto a fallen log, snow falling in stiff flakes around me. My head bowed, tears warming my cheeks against the chill. I pressed both hands to my face, trying to scrub away the image of his eyes, those eyes that saw me not as an enemy, but as something else. I thought it was over. I thought I'd killed her and could move on, But here was her offspring, standing where she could not, witnessing my crime in a silent rebuke. It felt like seeing a ghost, a revenant of my own guilt come to life. I closed my eyes, fighting the shudder that racked my body. The mist clung to me, as though the forest itself mourned. When I opened them again, the clearing was empty except for my footprints and the memory of small, yellow eyes. I whispered into the gray dawn, "I'm sorry." And in my heart, I knew that this encounter was not the end. I had seen a ghost, but this was no illusion. It was a harsh reminder that some debts could not be paid with bullets or bravado. I gathered myself and turned back toward camp, each step heavy with the knowledge that the story had only just begun. Episode 4, The She-Wolf in the Snow. I followed the trail of sorrow without thinking. Every drop of blood in the snow felt like a promise I'd made and broken. Morning had thickened into a dull gray light, and the mist clung to the trees like a shroud. My boots crunched through the crust of frost, tracing her final path. The tracks led me beyond the clearing, deeper into a silent cathedral of pines. The air smelled of cold earth and old needles. My breath came in ragged bursts as I rounded a bend, and there she lay. Her body was half buried in snow, as if the forest was already trying to reclaim her. She lay on her side, her head turned toward the direction of my camp, where I'd slept, where I'd hoped to forget. Her fur, matted and stained red, had begun to ice over at the edges. She wasn't struggling anymore. She was at rest. A gasp tore from me before I could stop it. I sank to my knees in the snow, rifle forgotten against a nearby tree. 1,000 thoughts thundered in my mind, but only one word escaped: no. She wasn't a trophy. She wasn't an enemy. She was a mother. My gaze locked on her muzzle, pointed like an arrow at the spot where I'd pitched my tent. She had dragged herself back. She had chosen to face me in her final moments. Then I heard a soft whimper behind me. I turned with a cry in my throat. There, at the edge of the clearing, stood the pup. He was shivering, tiny wisps of steam rising from his fur in the cold air. His eyes flicked between her still form and me. I felt my chest tighten until I thought I'd suffocate. The pup took a hesitant step forward, nose twitching as if smelling her warmth, or the absence of it. He padded closer, each step a plea. Tears finally spilled down my face. I pressed my palm against the softness of his coat, and he didn't flinch. He looked at me with the same luminous eyes I'd seen yesterday, a mixture of fear, confusion, and something I could only call recognition. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, voice cracking. The words felt too small for the moment. I knelt beside the she-wolf and ran my fingers through the snowy fur on her shoulder, where the shot had torn through. My tears fell onto her side and melted into the crimson stain. "If I'd known who I was killing," I choked out, a tremor shaking every word, I never would have pulled the trigger." Silence set in, heavier than any forest hush I'd ever heard. The only sounds were my ragged sobs and the pup's small whimpers. It felt as if the world was holding its breath, forcing me to face the enormity of my actions. I thought of all the stories I'd told myself to justify the hunt, how this was sport, tradition, necessity. None of them mattered now. Every excuse dissolved into the snow around us. The pup leaned into my hand, as if asking for answers I didn't have. My tears stained his fur, and I felt a fierce ache in my chest, a longing to undo what I'd done, to bring her back, to cradle her body as she had cradled him. I pressed my forehead against her flank, snow melting under my warmth. I imagined her strength, her loyalty, the lithe power in her legs. And I felt her dignity in defeat, her final act of dragging herself home. The pup whimpered again and nuzzled closer, then settled by her side, a vigil of soft whimpers and quivering breaths. I stayed with them until the pain in my knees became too much, until the cold threatened to steal my tears and freeze them on my cheeks. With a trembling hand, I gently scooped the pup into my arms. He looked up at me once, big eyes shining with trust and bewilderment. I held him close, feeling the thrum of his tiny heart against mine. I whispered through my tears, "I'll make this right. I swear it." I stood, lifting the pup against me, and cast one last look at her. The she-wolf's body lay peaceful, as if she'd finally found rest. I swallowed the lump in my throat and turned back toward my camp, each step heavy but determined. As I walked away, I heard a soft whisper in the wind, or maybe it was my own heart speaking, asterisk, "She gave you her child. Now must you live up to that gift, asterisk." And in that moment, I knew my hunt had only just begun, not for trophies, but for redemption. Episode 5, The Decision. The forest road back to my cabin felt impossibly long, each step heavy with the weight of the pup cradled against my chest. His fur was damp and matted, trembling as I held him, as if he expected me to hurt him at any moment. Outside, the wind rattled the bare branches, but inside me, a different storm roared, guilt, fear, and a fierce determination to keep him safe. When I reached the small wood cabin, the front door creaked under my weight as I pushed inside. Dust motes danced in the late morning sun that filtered through the windows. I laid the pup gently on an old blanket beside the hearth, then rummaged in the pantry for scraps, stale bread, cooked rice, and a tin of fish. He watched me with wide, golden eyes, torn between curiosity and terror. "Easy now," I whispered, placing a small heap of bread soaked in water just beyond his nose. He inched forward, sniffing, then snapped the morsel between tiny teeth. His body tensed as he chewed, but he didn't bolt. I let out a shaky breath. Over the next few days, I built a makeshift kennel in the corner of the living room, using an old dog crate lined with blankets. Each evening, I carried him inside and shut the door, only to find him pacing and whining at dawn. He refused to eat from a bowl, licking only the wet bread I offered by hand. At first, I thought he'd grown too weak to fend for himself, then I realized he distrusted everything except my touch. On the third morning, I found him huddled in a corner of the crate, eyes closed against the pain in his body. I knelt beside him and bruised my finger against a chunk of boiled chicken, then pressed it to his lips. He recoiled at first, then slowly opened his mouth and licked. I held his gaze, my voice soft, "You're safe here." More days passed. I cooked small portions of meat and fish over the wood stove, always offering them on the palm of my hand. His body grew stronger, fur filling out where it had been thin. But he remained cautious, ears flicking at every creak, nostrils flaring at every new smell. It took nearly 2 weeks before he took his first meal unhesitatingly, stepping forward to eat directly from a shallow dish I placed on the floor. I watched, heart pounding, as he finished the food and then looked up at me, tail giving a tentative wag. I realized I'd been holding my breath all that time. In that moment, as his amber eyes met mine without fear, I felt something inside me shift. For the first time in years, my cabin held more than dust and silence. It held life, fragile, wary, but alive. I started to leave the door to the crate open, and he would pad out at night, sniff around the old furniture, and curl up on the rug by the hearth. I sat a few feet away, watching him, unwilling to move lest he vanish back into the cold. Sometimes I'd reach out a hand, and he'd press his head into my palm, as though he'd found a place where he belonged. Old habits die hard. At night, I still draped my rifle over the chair back, half convinced I'd need it. But each time I lifted it, he'd lift his head, ears pricked, as if asking, "What's that for?" I'd lower it slowly and whisper, "Not for you." My neighbors in the valley would never believe this tale, a lone hunter adopting a wolf pup. But I didn't care. Each morning, when I opened the curtains to the gray mountains, he was there, standing on the stoop, waiting for me to fill his bowl. The way he looked at me then, it wasn't gratitude. It was acceptance. I told myself I was doing the right thing, that after the mistake I'd made, this was the only atonement possible. I named him Ash, for the pale gray of his coat and the way he rose from the ashes of his mother's death. I thought, he'll stay with me forever. I pictured years ahead, Ash curled at my feet by the fire, his head resting on my boot, both of us content in a quiet understanding. I'd tell stories of the hunt that never mattered, and he'd listen with those knowing eyes that had first frozen my heart in the woods. That night, I lay in bed and peered into the living room where he slept. A soft glow from the stove lit his fur, and his chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm. I closed my eyes and murmured into the dark, "I won't let you go." And in the hollow stillness, I believed I could keep that promise forever. But deep down, I felt a tremor of unease, as if the forest itself was watching, waiting for what would come next. He pulled the door closed behind us and felt the world shift. It was early spring. Snow had melted into muddy rivulets, and pale green shoots pushed through the earth. Ash's coat was thick now, rippling over lean muscles. He was no longer the trembling pup I'd carried from that frozen clearing. He was almost full-grown, tall as a German shepherd, with eyes that held the forest's secrets. I led him to the edge of the treeline behind my cabin. The sun was low, golden light filtering through budding branches. My heart pounded with each step. I kept my hand on his shoulder, as if I could anchor him to this place, to me. But I knew I couldn't. This was his world, not mine. He paused at the border of trees and clearing, nostrils flaring as he drank in scents I could barely imagine, elk trails, hidden waterholes, the faint trace of other wolves. I knelt beside him, fingers trembling as I traced a line down his flank. He leaned into my hand. I caught his gaze, that steady, knowing look. "I have to let you go," I whispered. My voice cracked. "This is where you belong." He lowered his head, pressing it against my chest. I closed my eyes against the lump in my throat. The breeze stirred his fur, and I could smell pine and earth and freedom. I stood and took a step back. He watched me, tail flicking once, twice. Then he turned, padding into the trees. His form blurred as he moved away, disappearing into the green gloom. I stood there until the last flash of his gray coat vanished. My legs shook with emptiness. I thought I'd made the right choice. I thought I was free of guilt, free of responsibility. But the forest felt hollow without him. Back inside the cabin, I stared at the empty hearth. My hands ached for the weight of his body, for the warmth of his breath. I lit the stove and sat beside it, watching the flames dance, wishing Ash were curled at my feet. Days passed in a blur of work and restless nights. Each morning I checked the porch, half expecting to see him waiting there. But the steps stayed blank, no prints marring the old wooden boards. I told myself it was silly, that I'd given him back the life he deserved. Then, on the 5th dawn after I set him free, I stepped outside and froze. In the soft, damp earth of the porch, clear as a photograph, were footprints. 4-toed pads, long and lean, pressed into the wood. They led up from the path and stopped at the threshold. My breath caught. My heart thundered so loud I thought he would hear it. I reached down, tracing the cold groove of his print with a trembling finger. I closed my eyes and pressed my palm to the wood, feeling the faint imprint of his weight. "He came back," I whispered. Guilt and wonder clashed in my chest. He came back, to see if I'm still here. I sank to my knees, head bowed against the boards. Tears slipped down my face, warm and wet. I thought I'd lost him forever, and he came back. Not for food, not for shelter, but to check on me. I looked up, expecting to see him bounding through the trees, but there was only the quiet morning, the birdsong, the distant drip of melting snow. The prince ended at the door, as if he'd paused there, looked in, then retreated. A gust of wind swept over me, and I felt his presence in every rustle of leaves. I imagined him standing at the edge of the porch, head cocked, eyes bright with concern. He had grown wild again, yet he carried the bond we'd forged in those first, desperate weeks. I pressed my forehead to the boards where his prince lay and whispered, "I'm alive, Ash. I'm right here." Tears blurred my vision as I sat there until the sun was higher, until the chill in the air lifted. I drew a slow, shuddering breath and rose to my feet. The world felt richer, charged with promise. I understood then that our story wasn't over. He had left, but he returned. As if checking I was alive. And in that moment, I knew I could never walk this forest alone again. A year had passed like a slow dream. The seasons spun their cycle, spring's green thaw, summer's fiery heat, autumn's amber farewell, winter's hush, before I found myself once more on that familiar trail. I carried only a small pack and the memory of fur against my chest, the echo of paws in the snow. The forest seemed unchanged. Pines towered against a pale sky, their needles whispering secrets on the breeze. I walked the same winding path, boots crunching on broken twigs and leaf mold. My heart throbbed with a mixture of longing and dread. Would I see him again? Would he remember me? Night fell earlier than I expected, the dimming light tugging at my senses. I pitched my tent in the same clearing where everything had begun. Inside, I warmed a can of stew over my little stove and stared into the darkness beyond the flap, half expecting golden eyes to peer in. But nothing stirred. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the sound of soft paw steps, so faint I thought it might be my imagination. My lungs seized as I lay perfectly still, the faint rhythm of breathing my only anchor. The tent walls rustled. I snapped on my headlamp and threw the flap open. Two shapes stood just beyond the glow, one lean and familiar, the other larger, powerful, a full-grown she-wolf, majestic and silver in the light. My breath caught. The smaller wolf's eyes locked onto mine first. I felt that old, sacred tug. He looked at me as one of his own. Recognition passed between us like a charged current. The pup I'd named Ash had grown into a noble wolf, his fur thick and eyes wiser than before. Beside him stood the she-wolf, her posture regal, her gaze unwavering. I recognized her instantly from the slight curve of her muzzle and the sorrowful resilience in her stance. She was the same she-wolf I had wounded, who had carried her pup to me in her dying moments. She had survived. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. I lowered my headlamp, unwilling to break that communion with harsh light. They stood motionless, silhouettes against the phantom glow of the forest. No growl, no threat, only a silent gathering of shared history. My legs trembled as I knelt in the snow, hands pressed together as if in prayer. Tears blurred my vision, but my heart felt clearer than ever before. Then, as gently as they had arrived, they turned. The she-wolf stepped forward, nudged Ash with her nose, and together they melted into the trees. No farewell glance. No howl. Just footprints leading back into the night. I remained on my knees long after they disappeared, the snow around me untouched except for my own imprint. My chest heaved with emotion, grief, awe, and a tender joy that felt like breathing for the first time. If your heart is stopping right now, you know. Subscribe to the channel. Here, we tell the truth. I made my way back to the cabin under a sky bruised purple by the setting sun, each step measured and slow. The forest seemed to exhale behind me, as if it had been holding its breath all this time. I could still feel the imprint of their paws in the snow, the weight of those golden eyes, the hush that followed them into the night. Inside, the warmth of the wood stove hit me like a welcome hand on the shoulder. I set my pack down and sank into the old rocking chair by the window, the one that creaked in protest under my weight. My journal lay on the small table beside me, its leather cover worn smooth by years of confessions, triumphs, and regrets. I lit a single lamp and opened it to the first page, where my handwriting was looser, younger, filled with the certainty of a man convinced he knew the forest and himself. Flipping through the pages, I saw entries from the weeks I spent chasing that wolf, detailed notes on tracks, sketches of paw prints, calculations of distance. Then came the crude drawing of her last stand, a red smear against white, a slash across the page. My handwriting jagged, desperate. Underneath, the words, "I thought I was doing the right thing." Further on, the pages grew more tangled. Scrawled lines about the pup I rescued, followed by shaky paragraphs of sleepless nights, of tiny teeth snapping at my fingers as he took food from my hand, of the first time he licked tears from my cheek. I read the entry from the morning I found his prints on the porch, my words inked in a rush, "He came back to see if I'm alive." Now, as I traced those words with a fingertip, the weight of it all settled in my chest. I closed my eyes and inhaled the scent of pine-scented smoke and old paper. I realized, in that moment, that the forest had come for one truth, and but offered another in return. I had come seeking a trophy, a claim of dominance. Instead, I found grace. I found forgiveness. A wild mother, wounded by my hand, somehow mustered the strength to drag herself back into my life, not to condemn me, but to entrust me with her most precious gift, her pup. Then, a year later, she returned again, not to exact revenge, but to stand beside her offspring in silent acknowledgement that our fates were bound. I took my pen and began to write a new entry, one I'd been too afraid to inscribe until now. I killed her with a single shot. I left her lying in the snow, convinced I had ended her story. But she came to me in her final moments, not to punish me, but to place her child in my care. She did not seek vengeance. She sought hope. My hands trembled as I underlined those lines. I paused, looking up at the dancing shadows on the wall, as if waiting for her eyes to peer back at me. The silence was thick, but it no longer felt oppressive. It felt sacred. I continued. If I had not stood in that clearing, if I had not seen her gaze, I would never have believed such mercy could exist. Nature came for the truth, and left me with forgiveness. In giving me her child, she taught me what it means to truly protect. I set the pen down and leaned back, my chest heavy with realization. My gaze drifted to the door, half expecting to see Ash padding across the threshold, or to feel a soft nudge at my leg. But the cabin was empty, save for the flicker of the lamp and the pulse of my own breathing. I closed the journal and held it to my heart. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, I spoke the words I needed to seal this confession. I killed her. And she came to me, not to avenge herself, but to trust me with what she valued above all. If I had not stood in that forest, I would never have believed it. But I saw it with my own eyes. I stood and crossed to the window, looking out at the moonlit treetops, their silhouettes shifting in the night breeze. The world beyond my walls felt alive with possibility, as if every whisper of wind carried her spirit and his. Finally, I turned back to the journal one last time and added my closing line. If you believe that animals remember, write, we are not alone in this world. I snapped the journal shut and placed it on the table, next to the lamp. Outside, the forest exhaled again, and I, at last, felt free.